Okay. So today I got Chris Miller, uh, who used to be started as like a sprint and hurdle coach at Altus. And then at one point he's a performance coach at Brooklyn Nets. So Chris, like, can you introduce yourself a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. So Chris Miller, I'm a performance coach. So I've worked on like you said, the track and field side of things. Started out working with the sprints actually. So I was a pretty kind of middle of the road athlete, I think, like a lot of strength coaches, background stories tend to contain. So I competed through high school and into junior college, and even then I was the kid asking the coach all the questions about the workouts and all this, that, the other. Um, so after I stopped competing, volunteer assisted with the sprints at Riverside City College first, actually. So that was my first exposure to being more on the coaching than athlete side. And that was everything from setting up workouts, helping with like meet management and things like that, very much intending to go the track and field coaching route. Um, Went to undergrad at St. Mary's College, California. Tried to volunteer assist with track there as well, and got sent down the hall to strength and conditioning because their staff was filled out. And I guess I didn't know the NCAA rules about volunteers being considered full-time coaches. So they were like, well, staff's full, but S&C is always taking people. So wandered down the hall, um, interned under John Gregory at St. Mary's. He's now at UCSD. Um, and yeah, from there it was a bit of a it was a it was a bit of a period of exploration of that side of things. I think as a track coach, you don't really consider the weight room as being so separate. I think as a lot of sports do. A lot of sports are looking at, okay, you have your skill work and you have your physical prep, and they're kind of very different things. Whereas in track and field, obviously it's a game of inputs and outputs, generally speaking. So a lot of your track coaches are programming their own strength work because they know how those pieces fit together and how they want them to fit together. So um, never really didn't really hold the separation in my mind going into the weight room. It was just this is an extension of my practice. This is something that will make me more hireable, right? Like, as a track coach, I was still thinking. Um, so yeah, interned at St. Mary's in the weight room. Graduated from St. Mary's, went to took a pretty pretty underwhelming job up in Santa Rosa for a little bit, and then internships at Stanford, Altus for a year, which was an amazing experience. Went back to grad school, USC, worked for the US ski team for 2 years, with the Brooklyn Nets for 3 years, and am now working with Mount Sinai Health System. So another little pivot, but that's kind of the brief overview of where I'm at and where I've been.
Nice, nice. So since we kind of all share like a track background, can you kind of share that? Uh, how does working with track or as a sprint coach help you to be a better like strength coach?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing, and this is a bit of a stroke of luck, to be quite honest. I don't think a lot of people, we want to look at sports and performance and professional advancement as all merit. And while that's nice, I think especially at the upper end, like luck does play a bit of a role. And so I got lucky. I think that speed was kind of coming into vogue in the sport performance world, and there are coaches who were starting to realize like, hey, speed kind of is this, this is the peak quality that we're trying to assess. It transfers to the field of play, to the court a lot better than strength per se. Um, so coming into the field at that time, I had a skill set already that I think was being sought after, and that people were pretty excited to incorporate. Um, and again, lucky that John was the first strength coach I ended up working under because he was a really open-minded guy. Didn't didn't like kind of pigeonhole things into, okay, well, you're an intern, so, you know, shut up, watch and clean racks and change out weights and things like that. Very much encouraged me and the other coach I interned with, Max Baer, who he was at Sonoma State and he was Diamondbacks and all that, like encouraged us to like really get our hands in it. Um, so I think the primary benefit of coming from track and field, one is kind of what I just mentioned about like not viewing these domains as being so separate, being like all of this is stress on the organism that moves us either towards or detracts from the goal capacities that we're trying to develop, and having this kind of, which I think is a lot more common line of thought now than it was even 5 years ago, to say, hey, stress is stress. We're pouring from the same bucket in this way, and I think that that's just kind of built in to track and field. You've only got you can't go and do if I go crush somebody on the track and then think I'm going to get the outputs I need in the weight room, then it's gonna you're gonna have very measurable results to show you that this is not working. I need to adjust. And so I think having that holistic view helped a lot. And then I think just having a framework of the of these really small progressions, of having a really clear view of the spectrum of certain types of load, I think is became very instrumental, especially once I entered the rehab and reconditioning space. Um, I think you look at track and field, you look at speed development and how you're dosing out your intensity buckets, and there's obviously we are very used to it's almost second nature to say, okay, like here's kind of our high intensity pieces, here's our warm up elements, here's stuff we know we can do afterwards, and you have this scale of intensity as far as speed and plyometric capabilities go. And I think when I came into the rehab space, again, even 5 years ago, it was still um, relatively common to see practitioners saying, okay, we have this athlete who maybe we're returning from an ACL, who maybe we're returning from um, an Achilles or a foot injury or whatever it is that's kind of kept these athletes off legs or away from running, sprinting, whatever they're at in the progression. And then just saying, okay, here's the timeline for tissue healing. Here are strength markers we want to see. And as soon as we hit these strength markers, something like that, then we're okay to start running. And really there not being any thought to bridging the gap between especially how strength training was carried out before, which is very largely concentric based, and then moving into, okay, running, which is very eccentric based activity, and saying, hey, there's this whole spectrum of hopping and jumping and skipping that we can use to progress not only the tissue capacity, but also the coordinative capacity, that foot ground interface, that yielding of the joints, that attenuation of load and impact through the limb. Um, and that, quite frankly, was something that I was able to leverage to a pretty significant effect, especially for me, like with the ski team, where because they're not running athletes, there isn't a lot of attention paid to these kinds of things. Or if you look at other more like kind of skill oriented sports, even like basketball, like they do some of these overground elements we have in track and field as parts of warm-ups, generally mindlessly, generally just kind of just get the body moving, um, but really not emphasizing kind of the what you can really gain from these things if you just strip it down and let's just have a period of time where we focus on this. So I think that having that framework um, really helped, and I think that was something that you have a knowledge of from track and field, but then I think formalizing it in into a thought process and into a process of practice was definitely assisted at by kind of my experience with Altus, and kind of hearing Dan Paff talk about just kind of thinking about progressing rehab exercises along the basis of like what is the maximal tension like within a muscle tendon unit that this exercise produces. And so obviously that's going to include both magnitude of force, but also the rate of force development in this. What kind is we concentric or eccentric are we? And then you can kind of you have all these scaling parameters, which then you can expand from and say, okay, cool. We can't running is essentially hopping from one leg to the other, like and with relatively short contact times repeatedly. That's obviously going to be a very high load activity. Where can we progress as well? We can lengthen the ground contact times. We can obviously you're going to see a difference in magnitude of force, but may see a decrease in rate. We can go on two legs. We can assist the jumps. We can we can have this in the skipping. We can reduce the amplitude of these things. And so um, just having these different scaling parameters, you're endlessly adaptable from the time you start. Like, okay, hey, let's say a double leg box jump to a very low box is in terms of jump training, like this is very low load. And then we're talking about bounding, sprinting at the other end of the spectrum. And everything in the middle there is just how can I tweak these parameters to meet the athlete where they are and give them what they need. And I think that has been, I mean, nearly built a career in reconditioning off of just those kinds of principles because that's really all what it is. You're meeting the athlete where they're at to give them what they need, and then we're progressing it along, right? Um, and then I think just the X's and O's of speed development I ran cross country and track. I was a 400, 800 guy, so love pain. So um, I think within that, you're in that you end up in a training paradigm that is kind of applicable to a lot of team sport athletes, right? There's the aerobic component to it, there's the anaerobic component to it, and you're okay, what's the balance of capacities we need, which anybody in track and field is going to be used to looking at because you have everything 100, 200, 400, 800, 1600, the hurdles, and so okay, cool. So there's a different blend of qualities that you need in each of these events, but also in the middle there's there's so many roads to roam for a quarter miler and for a half miler, and different training approaches and distributions of training and how different athletes absorb different training. And so I think it gives you there's a built-in respect for the complexity of the athlete, and it's a bit anti-dogma, where I think a lot of times you can just be like, okay, here's a system, and this is a system that, and this is how I thought about coaching when I was like young in track. Like the coach I worked under at Riverside, Damian Smith, he ran at Baylor, so he knew the Clyde Hart system inside and out. And you're like, okay, well that's Michael Johnson, that's Jeremy Warner, that's I think Angelo Taylor was he was a Baylor guy too, right?
Think so.
Um, yeah. So I mean, you're just and all these guys who are winning, obviously Michael Johnson being who he is, and like Jeremy Warner and Angela Taylor being like Olympic champions in '08 and being like, wow, like this is this system, right? And so you're like, okay, cool. So systems work, and then you get into it, and you're like, oh, it isn't that simple, and so you start to again appreciate the complexity of individual athletes, and again, like that being built on at Altus. So I think having something that it's really important, I think, as a young coach to feel like you have something you can hang your hat on. So you're like, okay, I bring something to this room, and I'm not just like shrinking back, sitting in a corner. Like, I feel like I'm able to get in the mix. I feel like I have a skill set that's valued, and I feel like I can get my hands in it because I have this understanding of the X's and O's, which then allows me to kind of it gives me a safe place to come back to for like here's where my value is, and the rest of it is like so now I feel more comfortable like kind of I feel comfortable telling you what I don't know because hey I do know something but like hey cool like here's what I need, here's the pieces I want. um so yeah, having that track background really I think like I've been described as a track guy nearly my entire career, even because it's the basis, even though I've spent most of my like professional years outside of track and field.
Nice, nice. And this is actually pretty awesome because like people call me a track guy or people consider me a track person. Although
Yeah.
I like basketball more, but like people still
Hmm.
consider me a track guy. And and at the same time when I work with track and especially like return to play guys or return to like sprinting guys,
Hmm.
you see like the return to play process from track and the return to play process from like basketball or other team sport are a lot different,
Hmm.
right? And just like you mentioned, like feel like I don't know why, like the past few months, I feel like the return to play process from track is much more like I don't know how to describe it, but it's much more comprehensive and it's like overall everything is considered. And when it comes to like team sport, I feel like it's still like, oh, this is the benchmark like strength we need to reach. Then we can like do a little bit plyo. Then we could do little bit of run. Which if we like, if I quote like Dan Paff or like Coach Boo, correct me if I'm wrong. They're gonna say like it's gonna make you like slower and then even slower when you go back to play.
Um, I don't know. I think the way that I look at it, I think um, with track athletes, we understand the end point is to be like you need to be able to express maximally, right? Like you if you're depending on the level you're at and the distribution of talent there, if you're 95%, no point, right? Like there's you're gonna get killed. um, and so I think with respect to that, yeah, it might tend to be a lot more comprehensive in that ready to return to play is ready to express maximally, as opposed to in a team sport, one, depending on the number of competitions, it's like, well, the longer you're out, the more load that's putting on other players, which is putting them at risk for injury. So we need to get you back in the mix. But also, I think they have the thought of the skill component. Like they think for some reason, I think there's just like, oh, well, if you're not doing the skill, then the skill is degrading, even if even if you've been playing for a very long time and you have it's very, it's downloaded. So there's that need to stay sharp on the skill side of things, the need to be integrated in the team from a team cohesion and flow standpoint. Like you need to be like, there's just not a whole lot of ways to recreate that stimulus perceptually, and that then being kind of more determinative of outcomes than strictly physical capacity. Now, of course, there's the danger to that is if you return an athlete unprepared or you structure their return such that we're dealing with higher risk just from a tissue capacity standpoint. Well, then they're going to get back in and they're probably going to re-injure and then they're going to be out again. And all the things that you're now worried about are being realized just a little bit further down the line. Um, and I think with most soft tissue injuries, they're going to be intolerant far longer than they're force intolerant. So I don't think that it's necessarily a matter of like if you're an injured athlete, you're already slower, right? Because the limiter might not be um, like like fitness, right? Like you might have the bioenergetic capacity to produce this output, but like you don't have the tissue capacity. Um, that's compromised. So there is still a period where it's just like we can't go after fast stuff, but it is not getting stuck just progressing on the force side of things. Like it's the first thing that we can come back to, and it's obviously very um it's a very potent stimulus for the tissues, but like speed and velocity are going to be the things that those are really going to be more related to your end. So the sooner I can introduce that safely, the longer that progression can be. And I think that is really what the That's I think a big difference maker because if I say I'm going to get you to this strength benchmark and then we're going to go to speed or we're going to start our speed progression, then have we introduced elements of the speed progression as early as we could, right? Because I'm just thinking, oh, okay, well, I'm not even going to think about it until the force is there. And I think and maybe it's just a matter of that threshold needing to be set appropriately because there's going to be a point in time where they can't go after the speed stuff. But I want to make sure that I start that progression as soon as I safely can to lengthen that runway because it's going to be the consistency and duration of time in which I've been dosing that capacity as opposed to I'd rather have a slower on ramp than a quicker on ramp, right? Um, so yeah, it's a bit of a double-edged sword, and I think it has more to do with the thresholds we set around those things and how strictly we adhere to those things. Um, and it's I think like the environment you're in terms of is this a is this college? Is this a developmental athlete? Is this a professional athlete? How certain do you need to be that like, I'm if I'm dealing with a professional athlete and the biggest thing is, man, if they come back and re-injure, that's my ass. Okay, well, I'm probably going to use more conservative cutoffs, but I'm still going to be attuned in their sessions to signs that they're ready to progress that. And whether that's on the force plates, whether that's something subjective. And a lot of times you'll see this, like you'll see athletes will tend to experiment, right? If they'll have some perception or sensation that like, oh, this tissue can like this can handle a little more, and you'll see them test it. And this is and obviously that's I'm not advocating for, oh yeah, just like, you know, just ask them if they're ready and go and try it. You go and like prescribe things based on just how they feel. But like a lot of times, especially like basketball players, you'd be like, okay, the first thing they want to get back to is shooting, right? They want to have a ball in their hand. So they're going to go back to ball handling and they're going to go back to shooting. And those spaces, if you just sit back and watch, obviously those provide a lot of space for those athletes to experiment, and you want to be cognizant of how much they do. But it starts with just like, okay, like we're in a ball handling drill and we're pushing off a little harder because we're testing. We're shooting and it's supposed to be no jump shooting and leave the ground a little bit, right? We learn about, and this is just how we learn about our bodies, even in development. We learn about our bodies and our movement capabilities through this constant physical experimentation. And so, there will be places in rehab where that's available to an athlete, whether or not it needs to be. It kind of happens whether you like program it or not. And I think it is prudent, depending on the athlete, the injury, the situation, to allow them a little bit of space to explore, um, without obviously putting themselves in any kind of great risk. Like obviously, I'm not letting someone go sprint down the court. They gotta they got a hamstring, there's central tendon involvement. We know that like that's not going to be super sensitive. They're going to feel ready way well before the tissue is ready. And so in that case, you're like, yeah, no, like we know based on the profile of this injury, like you're going to feel great before you're ready to go. And just kind of scaling your level of how hard am I on the reins, for that kind of thing. But yeah, I think it's just you just want to have that on ramp, and I think it also allows the athlete to you want the on ramp for their confidence and their sense of affordance, because as soon as they perceive that these actions are available to them, they're gonna want to. There's gonna be a tendency to start to push it a little bit, but they're also gonna that's updating their that's going to be an update to their kind of their model of how they can move, of their perception of affordance. Like, okay, cool, I can push off and not mess myself up. And I think that it's building that confidence back and like kind of beginning to address whatever kinesiophobia might have developed through that injury. Dan said often every injury is a brain injury, and of course, like our capacities are going to influence how we think we can move and what we perceive as being available to us. And so I think that's another place where I want that on ramp to be as long as it safely can be, because it gives you that time to say, hey, like I feel like these tissues are ready. Like I feel like that they're ready before I'm being assigned this work. I'm curious, at least, even that curiosity of like, huh, like felt good doing this. I wonder if, like, because that I think is that motivation to explore your capabilities is, I think, in and of itself a sign that like we're kind of coming along. It's not something you index on or program on, but I think it's good for the athlete.
Nice, nice. Just out of curiosity, when you were at Altus, do you spend a lot of time with Dan?
Actually, my the year that I was at Altus was, I think, the first year that Dan wasn't there full time. So yeah, I mean, yeah, like I was like, just my luck. And but like Dan was coming out for the ACPs, which were monthly and was great, accessible as Dan is. But yeah, I spent a lot of time with Stu and Jason and Jazz and Kevin and Andreas. And that was the crew that I was kind of mainly there with, and Jason and Jazz were in charge of kind of managing the interns of herding the cats. And then eventually, because I just like kept staying, like the internship terms are like 3 months, and I finished 3 months, and I was just like, oh, there's so much more here. Like there's so much more available here. Like I can't leave after 3 months. And so I was just like, hey, can I stay? Well, like, and they're like, yeah, sure. And say, I'm like, great. Stayed end of 6 months. I was just like, there's so much more here. Like this is so great. Like I just felt like I was learning so much, really enjoying the team, really enjoying the work, really enjoying the athletes. And again, like I'm a track and field guy. Like I just love track and field. So it was exactly the kind of thing I wanted to be doing. I'm like, man, just being able to watch athletes of that caliber. It was a pretty high powered group that year. Andre was still there, Fred
Mm.
was there, CJ Uja was there, Chavez Hart, rest in peace. He was there. Amir Webb was still there, Jody, Ella. It was a really like
Man,
great
that's a
group, and the
great
athletes
group.
were fun. It was so much fun. It was so much fun. Between like the personalities and the performance level, uh, it was a really, really great experience. And so that's a huge part of why I you know stayed as a volunteer for a year. And yeah, so some things are just no brainers, right? You're just like I'm in the right place. You have that, you just get that sense. You're like I'm in the right place. I'm doing what I need to be doing, and having a lot of fun with it. Like I think that's a huge um that's I think it gets underrated a little bit. Like we strength coach like to talk about the grind, and certainly there is an element of that. But have some fun, like I feel like that's why we get in sports. Like when I first started school, I was at UC Riverside, and I was planning to go into medicine. I wanted to be an orthopedic surgeon. And then I was like, dang, I'm not smart enough for this. Just a semester as a biochemistry major was enough for me. And also the team of the city college was a little bit better, and I was kind of floating a little bit in terms of, I was a kid. Um, but I was like, well, the reason I want to go into ortho is because I want to be able to have that proximity to sport still. Because that had been such a, positive force in my life. A lot of my best friends I've ever had are from sports. A lot of my affinity for working in great teams comes from sport. So it was a, it was just like, yeah, well, if I proximity to sport, then be like just be in sport. You know what I mean? Like kind of to it. Um, Questionable into that choice. Could have been a doctor. Maybe could have been a doctor. It could have, and it kind of, and then doctor. I've definitely the pro coach and how that's impacted my life. So yeah, is you definitely know when you're in the right place and doing the right thing and this agreement life and how this was just a peak experience of agreement for me. And I think the ski team was great um uh for me because we when I was interviewing with the ski team, we basically the interview presentation of your coaching philosophy. And I think after the review, somebody like asked the person who'd been leading my guy Callan Butterfield, who would kind of ran my interview process. They were like, "Did you hand this to the test here? Like, did you send a document of our philosophy? Like, what's like?" Because it was one document. It was like, okay, these are people and practitioners who approach this with very much the same, and I finding those environments where you are in agreement uh, is really important. Um, it really the it doesn't feel like a grind in those cases. You're like we're all pulling in the same direction. I have people like there's like no egos. I'm in an environment where I can learn. I feel like I'm at this environment. I feel this environment is to me, um, and it just flows and it flows from there. It's not those are special environments. They're special environments.
Nice, nice, nice. I love it. I love it. It's because I only asked it because so talk to me about I feel like recently there are more and more like NBA teams. Wait, I need to go back a little bit. I want to go back a little bit. So
Yeah,
like
no worries.
speed you mentioned.
Yeah.
Speed you mentioned. And I think a few years ago, like I think it's even before COVID that a lot of like NBA teams would like to hire track coaches like Coach Van Dan Path or like even Jonas Dadu as a consultant.
Yeah. Okay.
Do you think that also help you go into like the league?
Yeah, I think that again, I think, speed got hot in the field, and I don't think I'll necessarily think it's cooled off. I think it's the hype cycle. I think it was like the only thing, and we should train like everyone should train like sprinters for a couple years, and then it has like settled into what's its more appropriate place. Like this is always an element that's always been important. And how do we approach this in a way that is appropriate for our environment? And I think that's why you're seeing, um, a lot of people consulting with Dan and Jonas and Les Spellman and guys like that, because you have people who aren't just relying on what they know about sprinting from track and field. They're saying, "Hey, here are these speed related elements that here's what speed looks like in your environment. Here's what speed looks like and what capabilities influence this kind of performance in your sport, in your environment, and the things that you need to be aware of. And here's also opportunities for you to kind of dose speed, to quantify speed." And I think that's the biggest thing. It's like you're thinking about speed not in isolation, but you're thinking about it ecologically, you're thinking about it in an integrated manner, and knowing how like sports science is everyone's data driven. Everyone's collecting massive amounts of data, and they're wondering, okay, how do we filter this? Like, how do we get to the signal from the noise? And so I think again, you guys like Jonas and Dan and Les have done a very good job of being able to help direct people through some of the noise, because the system we live in, anything gets hot, and now it's profitable. Now you're going to get a flood of information in the market, and it's great that there are ways for coaches to make some money on the side. It's great that there are ways to share knowledge, but it also creates, this information problem of just, okay, how do we sort through it? And those guys have shown themselves to be very reliable and have experience across sports and you're not just gonna get a track coach telling you to run track practice.
Nice, nice. So another element that I feel like having, man, I spend a lot of time talking about like track stuff, but whatever.
Love it.
So I feel like another element that having a chat background help at least help me as a strength coach is besides watching how athletes move in the weight room, besides like power clean or like uh whatever back squat or whatever.
Yeah,
We kind of also enjoy or like to look at how athletes move on the court, and we have like clue what should we look at,
yeah,
right?
yeah. That's a great point. 100%. Um, yeah, the development of that coaching eye, 100%. And I think the development of that coaching eye in, again, I think, like you're saying, on the court. And I think that holds value in two ways, right? I think one is that your coaching eye gets calibrated to higher speeds. Um, like like you can watch somebody do a maximal acceleration, and if maybe say like my eye is already pulled to, I have a framework for looking at fast things. Like I'm gonna notice the overall geometry. I'm gonna notice some deficit. I'm gonna notice the outcome. I'm gonna notice the geometry. I'm gonna notice how did they create that outcome, and then like things are gonna start piecing together in my head based on what I believe to be true from a diagnostic standpoint. And that is for sure a skill that a lot of coaches take maybe a bit more time to develop, or maybe rely quite a lot on video to develop, which then just kind of delays your ability to feedback, which is not bad. And I still take video and I still review video. Um, but I do think it does kind of help build buy-in to be on the field of play, on the court or whatever, and be like, okay, I'm looking at the sport and I'm able to come up with something that I think or believe or that I've diagnosed from the performance of the sport. And that creates buy-in with sport coaches. Because to you, you're like, I looked at an acceleration within this play. To the coach, you watch the play and we're able to glean something from it. And so to them, you're analyzing the sport. To you, maybe you're analyzing the athlete and the movement and whatever it is. And so that creates, I think, some common ground to start having conversations, which is super important. Um, and the other thing I would say is that having that coaching eye and having that eye for geometry. I mean, again, it's not just running that you've seen, right? Any like this, the diverse elements of any like training practice, like you're gonna move, you're moving laterally, or rotating, or you get this, you get a very holistic view. I think is just kind of the like, okay, like this, here's this geometry, here's where we're rotating, here's you should be able to like mailbox athletes based on here's how they produce this guy's fast off the ground, this guy's long out the back, this guy's whatever it is, and then you can start to make inferences from there. And you can test those things if you have, if I got force plates and I'm like, oh, this guy seems like a real like concentric power guy, and this guy looks like a real reactive strength guy. Just go, okay, what's the force plate data say? Like, okay, cool. Now I'm able to, now I know what, I have a better idea of what this athlete's strengths are, and I can coach them towards that, and I can appreciate that, and I can look for where that shows up in their sports skill. Like I was working with one of the young centers at the Nets, and a lot of times your assumption about big guys is that they're going to be very, one, they're going to be a little slow. They're going to be um, very generally going to tend more on that concentric power side because they're going to be carrying more muscle mass. And but I had a center, and he incredible reactive strength. He was a really, really good rebounder because he's 6'9", he can put his hands up, he can stay stiff, create that system stiffness, and be very reactive off the floor, fast off the floor, and grab boards. He's an absolute monster on the boards. Um, But the assumption typically would be, oh, like this guy, like if you're talking about this guy needs to get, the guy needs to get bigger or stronger. He's a young center. And so there's an element of that, more powerful, this, that, the other. Needs to, work in deeper angles from a defensive standpoint as well, but also, oh, if he's, it's going to help him get more boards. Like, well, that's actually not how this athlete goes about that. Like, this person's really good at getting boards because he can yield less for the same jump height. He's able to get up faster, and then if he misses the board, then he can get back up faster, as opposed to another center who would have to load up, get up there, come back down, take a long time on the floor. And so you're like, yeah, we can definitely work on getting the kid generally like strong and fast, but don't mistake that as being what makes like that's not technically what makes this kid special in the way that he is, like what contributes to his skill in the way that he contributes to the game is actually the fact that he's pretty damn springy for a guy his size. So we need to respect that. We need to make sure we don't lose that in the pursuit of, oh, he has to be able to, get his hips lower. It's like his ability to be reactive is also super important to his performance as a defender, right? In terms of that agility and change of direction. So it's there, and we'll bring this thing up slowly, but we'll make sure that we're keeping that sword sharp because that's his superpower. Um, and yeah, so I think just kind of taking, and I think even that the whole like coaching to the athlete solution. Thanks, Stu. I could, I could, yeah, I could be, carbon copy, like, just copy and paste that from Stu and Dan. Um, but the thing is, like, if this stuff didn't work, I would not still be saying it. I definitely like, uh, I there are a lot of people that I respect a lot and that who I might like. I'm listening to what they say, but I'm always putting it. You always have to apply it. Like it's yeah. Again, there are a lot of people who like seem smart and have a lot of stuff to say, and you go and try it, and either you see that maybe it doesn't work, or that it doesn't work for you, or it doesn't work in your um environment or whatever it is. But this is why I like broad and general rules. I like heuristics. I think when I moved away from searching for a system, I started searching more for frameworks and habits of mind. Like, and for that reason, I stopped. I mean, I kind of moved away a little bit from consuming like a lot of like technical text and like information um, for a while because I was like, okay, I feel like I have quite a lot of information, and now what I need to do is like sort through this and apply it and test these things and see what sticks. And I think sometimes we can confuse consuming information for like, okay, this is a lot of what to package anything and deliver it, you kind of have to reduce the complexity of a thing. You have to be able, even just to put things into language, you have to reduce them. And so systems, I think, seek to reduce complexity for the most part, where frameworks, habits of mind are helping you navigate complexity, to accept it and navigate it because it's not going anywhere, right? We can cut things up into these little pieces so that we can talk about them, think about them, and discuss them and share them. But it has to come back to the whole. Like you always have to come back to the whole. And if you cut things up so nice and neatly, and you're like, cool, I understand all of these little pieces through and through, but it's like, okay, well, movement and motor behavior is an emergent property of all of these pieces. It's not just piece things back together. And I think coaches are pretty aware of that these days. But I also like that's just a more fun way to think to conceptualize and think about and practice coaching for me. Like I'm a pretty like intellectually curious guy. So it's more fun to try to like navigate the complexity than it is to just say like, well, we work in the real world and we can't just deal with this very complex thing and just reduce it. Like that's kind of boring.
Yeah, nice, nice. I feel like Do you, all right, just when you were at Altus, do you also like spend a lot of time with Exos? Because like it's like Altus and Exos in your like in your body talking. If I'm making sense, I don't know.
Yeah, no, I got you. Um, I mean, we spent a lot of time where we trained at Exos for the most part, and ACPs were there. And besides going out to the track, we were mostly at Exos. I I don't think I learned their. I don't think I spent as much time in their systems. I did obviously spend quite a bit of time with like hanging around their practitioners. Um, and for the most part, their practitioners were very like much absorbing what like Altus was putting out there as well. But um, I think the funny thing is that the reason that it sounds so maybe like yeah, it sounds like this is a coherent maybe hopefully coherent communicating of like both of these systems and integration of these systems is that they're just kind of like good systems that are based on pretty sound principles. And then if you go and try to explore the principles for yourself, which I feel like I'm always looking for like again, like frameworks and habits of mind and like very broad and general things that I can then kind of work forward from as opposed to an endpoint that I work back from. I want to be able to like kind of deduce things about, like pure deduction. Um, I just think their theoretical and philosophical bases are just quite sound. And so I think you can kind of logic your way to into these systems, even if you didn't steep yourself in these systems, right? It's like in evolutionary biology, like the eye, some version of the eye evolved independently like four times, five times, because it just made sense, right? Because it was just like this is the best way to, you know, um, be able to gather more information about the world and then enable an organism to go and acquire more resources. Like it just makes sense. And so I think you start to go out and pick around things that just make sense. And you can pretty easily end up in a place where you're like, oh yeah, like this does sound a lot like that, this or that system. Like it's not a whole lot new under the sun, right? And so you're gonna cycle yourself around there. But I do think that it's I don't want to say comforting, but it's nice, I think, to arrive there for yourself in some ways, or to try to depart from it intentionally, and then end up having walked in a circle and be like, oh yeah, no, like this actually, like this checks out from my own experience. This checks out from the experience, from my interactions with others, and kind of how just you end up triangulating on it, and you're like, yeah, like this is just sound. And I think every idea and framework should be and system should be subject to that kind of scrutiny or like academic rigor or whatever it is. Like always test it. Like always test it. Um, if it works, it works.
Nice, nice. I love this. I love. So, uh, in track, we like to use like high day, high, low day, low model, like high low
Mhm.
model. And I know team sport is a little bit different, although like in the past few years, there's like game day lift in NBA, game day lift in Major League Baseball, or like even soccer, if I'm correct.
Mhm.
So, but I know like in the NBA, team to team, there are like a lot of difference. Depends on the schedule, depends on the player. But can you also share a little bit like when you're at the league, how do you guys like program lift during the season? I know this is a big one, but yeah, and it depends.
I mean, to be quite frank, is pretty simple. We would lift game day because we play three times a week on average. Like on average through an NBA season, NHL season, you're playing every other day. So I think most of the field's pretty familiar with the concept of, hard days hard, easy days easy. So you consolidate that stress so that you're not, so that, when we're in days in between games, you might do some like an upper body lift or something regenerative, a pool session, or really focusing on recovery. And the days that we're on. So a lot of times those lifts are quite short. We make sure we do our, depending on obviously the athlete situation, we do our damnedest to make sure that we are developing capacity and moving the needle in the off season, and then we come into the regular season. And for a bit there, for maybe like through the preseason, we might still have a slightly more kind of regular structure of, okay, we have a game here, we can get a lift between games. Um, but you just play way too much in season to be able to for it to be a great idea to get any kind of like lower body lift in on the days they're off. Some guys though who have I think who have better backgrounds of strength training um preferred to I want to lift I lift on the off days. This is just part of my routine. I lift on the off days, and often it is what you would kind of term regenerative for an advanced trainee. Um, it's almost loaded mobility a lot of times. And of course, we make sure that, hey, you need some real load in here, and these are kind of the things that here are non-negotiables often in terms of tendon loading. Um, but a lot of times post game, you have most of the guys who kind of met their minimum minutes, uh, amount of minutes in game, they'll go straight to a lift. It's usually maybe three lifts. Get your big rocks in, kind of your either usually a heavy lower body lift. And that's can alternate between single leg and double leg. You're gonna get your lower leg work. You're gonna get your post chain hamstring work, depending. And usually, if we're going into we there's the eccentric hamstring emphasis when we know we're gonna have a couple days off if we're gonna have like 48, 72 hours between games. And so I think the tough part, and I think the reason that this is a particularly good idea in the NBA is that a lot of these guys, their training age in the weight room when they come to you may be zero. Like a lot of if you're talking about your first round picks, a lot of those guys did 1 year in college and then got drafted. Um, and so you've had a mix of experiences where, okay, we had a second round pick who 4 years at Kansas, like a guy who spent 4 years with Ramsey. You're doing great. Like you've got a great foundation. The physical capacities are there, the knowledge of the weight room is there, the maturity is there, like your approach is like a professional. Like we can like yeah, like we can there's a little more wiggle room around there because you're developed in that way. A first round pick that we got who did a lower body lift once in high school, did it with a football coach. It made him massively sore, and then spent the next 4 years dodging the weight room, went and did our dodging lower body days, only did upper body, and then went to college. And the NCAA system is like, well, we know this kid's going to the league after 1 year, so we'll just keep him happy and on the court. That's a very, very, very different situation, right? And like you get it. Like you don't want that to be the case, but like you get it. A lot of these guys hit like 6'6" in like their sophomore year of high school or something. It was pretty clear, like, hey, that's a unicorn. Like just
Yeah.
kind of let them do their thing, give them what they need. They're going to produce for you at that level. But then they get to the league and it's a thing of like, okay, what got you here won't get you there. Like the next step in your career is like is to start taking this stuff seriously. If you want to be here for a long time, if you want to get the most you can get out of the NBA, it's like you're going to have to take the physical prep seriously. So with those guys who have um those lower training ages, it's like lifting in between games can really be like that's a pretty significant stressor for them. Where for a more advanced trainee, you're like, yeah, like so and so who is a 9-year NBA veteran and has a background in this and is quite athletic can come in and front squat on, I mean, as much as you even see basketball, these front squatting, but they can come in and they can get like a reasonable lift in on an in between day, and that's not tanking them for the next day. Whereas with your less advanced trainees, you just know that that's going to hit them a lot harder. And so making sure that they get what they need when they need it, and they do need it, is generally best done in that kind of consolidated period. And also I think there are so many impediments to recovery, which I think is the other conversation, where travel, just like kind of its effect on sleep, the effect of certain lifestyle choices on recovery, the fact that like you're playing games. A lot of times games start 7:30 and you're in a very high arousal situation until 11 p.m. and then you're supposed to go home and go right to sleep. Like a lot of times it takes guys a while to come down, so maybe you're not falling asleep until 2, 3 in the morning, right? Like maybe the only time you're able to have to yourself in this day wasn't until after the game, right? Like you got maybe a 2 hour nap between shoot around and the game, but like that psychological recovery. It's like when you get done with a busy day and people like sit on the couch and scroll on their phones and procrastinate on things that maybe need to get done or don't even do things that are terribly good for them because they're just like, this is, I just need to decompress. And so where do the athletes have that time to decompress? Often it's going to be, hey, game's over. Like maybe we're traveling tomorrow, like, but just like have that time to like come down. So sleep is very affected by travel and arousal and the kind of what I would assume would be a significant shift in a typical circadian rhythm. Um, and then again, like you're traveling constantly. Like what are the dietary choices that you're making? Obviously, the team makes sure to provide healthy food as often as possible. Provide breakfast, lunch, and dinner, but there are still dietary choices to be made between then. And are you staying on top of all of those things? And it can just be a lot to keep track of, right? Like it's just a 24-hour athlete kind of thing. Um, but and there's just the stress of being in the league. It's about livelihood for a lot of these guys, right? And I think you look at what's just gone down in the league, and like I think a comment that a lot of players have made, oh, if Luka Doncic can get traded, no one's safe, right? And I think that's like it's a funny quip, but it's also a very real feeling that players feel, and it's very stressful. Like to feel nobody's safe, like psychological safety is like that is a very important thing for people to feel to be able to get into a parasympathetic like restful recovery kind of state. And so if I'm sitting here wondering like, am I still going to be here at the deadline? How's the team doing? Am I still going to be here at the trade deadline? Summer rolls around. Am I still going to be here? So you never have more than a if you feel that you never have more than a 3 or 4 month break from worrying about your livelihood, like that's a significant stressor that I don't think gets talked about very much because it's like, oh, like you're rich, like you're guaranteed your money, you'll be fine. Like, the constant risk or threat of having to like uproot your entire life, and maybe you have a family, like maybe you're young and you're wondering if you're just going to be able to stay in the league, maybe you've come from not a lot and this is the first time you've had anything, and so it's the threat of losing that is very, very real and very, very stressful. And I don't think it's talked about enough how that stress, you know can have ramifications on like performance. And obviously I think in that case performance isn't like the most important thing to think about, but it is like obviously in professional sports that's still the outcome that we're indexing on. So um yeah, having that environment, having that feeling of you belong here, you're safe, like we care about you, in a way that is not just performative. Like, oh, we care about you because we want you. We care about you performing. Like, we care about you performing and we care about you are obviously very different things. And I think that's why the relationship piece has become so emphasized in the like kind of past few years. And um, like an ability to put these guys' minds at ease and make them, feel like they belong and that they're cared about has has real effects, has real impacts. And yeah, that's definitely, I think, an underrated factor that goes into a player's capability to perform.
Nice, nice. I love it. I really enjoy this. All right, I
Absolutely.
know you're busy, so I'm gonna la ask you a last question and I'll let you go. Okay, so you you're at Altus at very early on in your career, and
Mhm.
then you're at USS Ski, and then at NBA, right? So like every place you went to are like very high level, like the top of like our industry in our industry. So Uh, in terms, like you mentioned earlier, like you enjoy those places, you feel like you learn a lot. So now, like, how do you learn stuff since you went through all those like top of the top?
Yeah, I like to I like to learn, and I learn best in relationship. I like to have conversations. I like to think about things. I love to read, of course. I like to read books more than I like to read papers, but I'm in a research environment now, so I definitely am getting more into like I'm further down the rabbit hole reading papers about technical stuff because like this is not somewhere that I have all the X's and O's that I need to construct the kind of solutions that I need. Um, so there's a technical reading. I try to read pretty broadly. I like to read a lot of evolutionary biology. I like to read a lot of behavioral psych. I mean, I'm looking at my bookshelf right now. There's some philosophy, there's some mathematics, there's some physics, there's some things on creativity. I think like you can learn something everywhere. And I think that again, shout out Stu. Um, I think it was in probably one of his blogs, like one of his older blogs, where he was like, I don't read a lot of things about coaching, but everything I read is about coaching. So there's that sense that like again, like we draw a lot of lines and we say this is about this and this and that. But there's something you can apply in a mental model, in a framework, in a habit of mind that you can pick up from nearly any subject, nearly any practitioner across any field. And I think that the core of it is seeking mastery, right? Like someone who has found mastery in this is why I love the show Chef's Table, because those to me that's just a docu-series about mastery in my opinion. Like it's very well shot. It's very well done, all that. Um, and so I think that kind of pursuing mastery and pursuing like kind of the perspectives of people who have found that and then seeing how they shape their perspectives, what their habits of mind are, what the commonalities and similarities are. Um, that's that's huge. Like that's a huge learn. Like I find a lot of learning opportunity in that. I like to learn by doing. I like to apply. I like to test things. I like to break things. I like to, I like to like see where it breaks down. I think that's like why we learn a lot about human physiology and health from performance and medicine, right? You're looking at the absolute tip top of what the human body can do, and you're looking at the absolute like lows the human body can reach. And so you're just looking at where does this system break and what can we learn from that. And then I like to put pieces together. I like to solve puzzles. I've found that I like to be creative, and I have to give my friend Austin Einhorn a ton of credit here. Huge shout out to him. Um, I just kind of he's someone who presented at Altus. I don't think I was there when he did, but I came across one of his presentations, and his way of looking at movement and the human body was just outside of what I had encountered. I didn't see a lot of it was evolutionary biology from that kind of perspective, and integrated the development piece. And I felt, I mean, I hit him up on Twitter. I want to say it was a cold message on Twitter. I was like, oh, he's using, I'm a rock climber. He was using climbing with the conventional sport athletes. I was like, that's cool. Like, you want to hang out and like just shoot the breeze? And he was like, yeah. And he's now one of my closest friends and someone that I can think with. Like, there's no ego, there's no judgment. It's just this like free flow. And then going and seeing his practice and how creative he is in his practice, and how I think even more so than a lot of coaches, he just doesn't pretend to have all the answers, but he's very much like, I have a framework for finding the answers. Like, I have a pretty good idea of, I'm pretty open about like, here are the clues I'm following. And, I'm going to pause and think in a session. I'm not going to try to just pretend to you that like I know everything. And that was integrated like, hugely into my like rehab experience at the ski team. So yeah, I mean, I could spend another 30 minutes going on about just all the people, all the practitioners that I learned from. But I think that's the big thing, is just that like that it really is like learning by doing, learning in relationship, and being creative and having this like space to explore, is, I find those things to be really, really fruitful. And so I always seek out opportunities to learn in that way. And um, just kind of keep the ball rolling, follow curiosity, and stay stoked.
Nice, nice. Man, I take a lot of notes here.
glad I provided some value.
Of course, I love your stuff.
Appreciate it, man.